Hi everyone! I did a video a little while ago showing you the absolute basics of knitting, so knit, purl, cast off and cast on, and I promised you that I'd show you something really cool that you could make with just those stitches, and the video has come! So today I'm going to show you how to make this little bear, which is the cutest thing in the world. He looks like this, and he's lovely, and he only uses the stitches that I showed you in the previous video. So I'm going to be using those stitches today, and I'm not going to go through them in as much detail as I did in the first video. So if you haven't seen that one yet, go back and check it out, and then come back and you can make your little bear. I've called mine Clarence. To make your bear, you're going to need the following. You're going to need 4 colours of yarn, and we're going to be using double knit width. So double knit is about this thick. And you're going to need 1 colour for his head, 1 for his trousers, 1 for his top, and 1 for his scarf. These are the colours I'm going to be using, but you can mix and match and use whichever colours you like. We're going to be making him using 3¼ mm knitting needles, which are a UK size 10. You're going to need a pair of scissors so you can snip off the ends, and a darning needle to sew him up. So a needle nice and thick to pull the yarn through. You're going to need some toy stuffing, just like this. And then for his little features, you're going to need some black thread. I'm just using black yarn. I'm going to ravel this up because it's a right mess. And an optional thing to do, but I find really effective, is to use safety eyes, which look like this. So I don't know how well you can see it, but they have a little ridged back to them. So they come with some back, so once you pop that through the knitting, slide on the back, and then the ridged edge stops it from coming out. I've used it in this bear so you can see what they look like once they're in. The wallpaper I use to make it look like I have nice furniture for my knitting videos is optional. First of all, we're going to start with Teddy's feet. So you're going to need your main colour for your teddy, and you're going to need your knitting needles. So we're going to take our main colour, and we're going to cast on 10 stitches. So you can do this in either the long tail method, or you can do it in the knitwise method. I'm going to show you in the long tail method. So we're going to leave a nice long end of wool here, and we're going to make a loop by starting to tie a knot. But then, rather than pulling this end all the way through, we're just going to grab it and pull it through, and then pull to create a loop. We're then going to slide that loop onto our needle, and then pull both ends so that it tightens up. Remember not to make it too tight so that you can still slide the stitch up and down the needle. Then with the long tail method, we're going to pinch and go in between the 2 bits that are hanging down, spread, and grab the ends with the rest of our fingers, so we have this shape. And we're going to pick up the strand that's under our thumb, go under that, and then go over the strand that's over our finger, and then pull that back through that U and pull it tight. And we're going to repeat that to give us 10 stitches in total. So under the bit under the thumb, over the bit over the finger, and through and down. Now we're going to start to make his foot. His foot is made in stocking stitch, which is where we alternate between a knit row and a purl row to give us a nice flat sort of pattern. So we're going to start with a knit row. The needle with our stitches on becomes our left hand needle now, and we're going to pick up our right hand needle. We're going to start with a knit row, so we're going to go through the first stitch on our needle, sort of following the track that the left needle is taking to go through that loop, and your right hand needle is now behind your left. We're going to take this strand of yarn and go around the back of the right hand needle and then back in between the 2 needles, pull that through that loop we've just been through, and then slide it off, and then in, round, through and off. And we're going to carry on doing that to the end of the row. I should mention, just because I'm doing it like this, if you're new to knitting you might have to wrap it around like this, and that's absolutely fine. Now we have our knit row and we're going to move on to our purl row. So we're going to swap the needle round, and you can see we have bumps on this side. So with stocking stitch, all the bumps are going to be on one side and all the V's are going to be on this side. So we're going to purl another row here to continue with our stocking stitch and keep all the bumps on this side. As we're purling, we're going to go into this stitch this way this time. Go through that first loop, and your right hand needle will be in front of your left. We're going to take our yarn and we're going to go in between the two needles, around the right hand needle only, and back to the front. And then pull that through that loop and slide it off. So again, it's in, round, through, and off. And continue with that to the end of the row. And there we go, we have our second row of stocking stitch. So all of our V's are on the same side there, and our bumps on the same side there. His feet are going to be 6 rows long, so our next row is going to be a knit row. And then we're going to follow that up with a purl row, a knit row and a purl row, and that will give us our 6 rows. Once you've done your 6 rows, you'll have a little foot that looks something like this. What we need to do now is change into his trouser colour, so we can start making his leg. I'm going to show you how to change colour, but if you find it a bit too fiddly, then you can just carry on in the main colour. He'll just be nude, which is fine. To change trouser colour, we're going to do this on a knit row. So what we're going to do is put our needle through that first loop as if we were just going to knit as normal. So we have our right hand needle behind our left. We're going to take our, I'm using blue, but whatever colour you're using for your trousers, and we're going to lay it down so that the short end is sort of in line with where you'd pick up your wool from. So they're together like that. We're then just going to use this to knit instead of our main colour. So we're going to wrap that around that needle like we would for a knit stitch normally. Pull that through the loop and slide it off. And then we're just going to carry on knitting in this colour to the end of the row. Once you get to the end, we need to break off our main colour. So I'm just going to lie that down and just snip away the main colour. And I'll take that colour away. Now with these ends, these can come unravelled if they're not secured. So what you can do is you can either sew them in with a darning needle, or the much simpler option, which is tie these two in a double knot, just so they're nice and secure. And that's how you change colour. So we've now joined on our trouser colour. We need to do 30 rows in total of garter stitch, which is where you knit every row. I've already done my first row when I joined on that main colour, so I'm going to do 29 more rows of just knitting, so that's garter stitch. Now when you're finished with your 30 rows, you'll end up with a little leg that looks like this. So because we've done garter stitch on his leg, we've got alternating between V's and bumps, and that's the effect that garter stitch gives you, and it's exactly the same on the other side. And you can see it's slightly different to stocking stitch. There you go, we've practiced 2 stitches just in his little leg. Now we need to make his other leg, so what we're going to do is break off our yarn, and we're going to leave an end here, because if you leave it too short it might start unravelling at the needle. So leave a nice long end and snip that away. We're then going to slide our little leg down to the end of the needle, and we're going to leave him there for later. So for now we can take our trouser colour away and take his body colour back, because we're going to make another foot. What we're going to do is make the next leg exactly the same as the previous one. So we're going to cast on 10 stitches, and we're going to cast on to the same needle where this leg is being held. So again, I'm going to do the long tail method. So I'm going to leave a long end, make a loop, and then pull that part the way through to create our little loop like that. Pop it onto the needle that's got the leg on it, and pull that tight. So we're going to cast on 10 stitches in whichever method you're choosing. So we've got our 10 stitches. What we're going to do is do exactly the same as we've done on the first leg. So we're going to stocking stitch 6 rows, starting with a knit row. I'm not going to show you all of this again, but if you want to rewind the video and look at how to make it, how you made the foot the first time, you can go ahead and do that. But it's going to be knit the first row, and then purl the second, knit the third, purl the fourth, and carry on doing that. So we have 6 rows of stocking stitch. Now I've got our 6 rows, which is our little foot. We need to change back into the trouser colour now to make his leg. So I'm going to bring in my trouser colour and change to that colour just by going through as if I was about to knit. Laying that out alongside the main colour and just picking that colour up to knit with. And just like with the first leg, we're going to garter stitch 30 rows. So we're going to knit every row for 30 rows. But don't forget, when I get to the end of this first row that we're doing, I'm just going to snip away the main colour and take that away. And I'm just going to tie the ends of the main colour and the trouser colour in a double knot to make sure it's nice and secure. And then carry on and garter stitch 30 rows, or 29 more, because we've already done one. And once you've done your 30 rows, you've then got 2 little legs which are same length, same pattern. They are identical and they should both be on the same needle. If they're not, you probably casted on your second leg onto the wrong needle. What we're going to do now is we're going to slide both legs up and we're going to join them together. So to join them together, all we're going to do is knit another row, but we're going to knit across both of the legs. So let's knit as normal across the first leg. Now we've gone across our first leg and we're going to pick up our second leg and just carry on as if it was the same piece that we were knitting. And there you go, both of your legs are now joined together. So we're going to continue up with his trouser colour for another 15 rows of garter stitch, so 15 rows of just knitting. So after you've finished those 16 extra rows, once you join the legs together, we now need to change into his top colour. So we're going to get our top colour wool, and I'm going to be using purple. And we're going to change colour just like we did when we changed colour from his feet to his trousers. Needle through the first stitch, but then pick up the purple instead, or pick up your top colour instead of your trouser colour. So lay them out together and just start knitting with the purple, or whatever top colour you're using. And we're going to do 24 rows of garter stitch again. So garter stitch being the knit every row, same as what we've done for the trousers. So remember, once you get to the end of the first row, to secure the ends. So I'm going to cut away my trouser colour. and take that ball away, and then just take these ends and tie them in a double knot. And there's going to be 24 knit rows here, so I've already done one, so I'm going to knit another 23 rows. After those 24 rows, we've now got a complete top. So we've got his feet, we've got his trousers, and we've got his top. And now we need to change back into the colour for his head. Like we changed colour before, we're just going to start to knit as we normally would, but with our new colour. Pick up the main colour, and we're going to knit the first row. So we've done his jumper and his top in garter stitch, but we did his feet in stocking stitch. So to match up with the feet, his head is also going to be in stocking stitch, which is where we're going to knit a row, then purl a row. And we're going to carry on alternating between knit and purl rows so that we get all of our V's on one side and all of our bumps on the other side. So at the end of our first row, again, we just need to make sure we secure the ends. So I'll cut away my top colour and then tie those ends in a knot again. And then we're going to purl the next row so that we can continue in stocking stitch. So to purl, remember that rather than going through this way as we have for most of this when we've been doing garter stitch, we're going to go through the loop on the needle this way so that our right hand needle is in front of our left. We're going to take our yarn in between the two needles, around the back of the right hand needle, and then back to where we started, and then pull that through that loop and slide it off. And we're going to purl this whole row. And then we're going to carry on with the knit row to carry on with stocking stitch. We're going to do 42 rows in stocking stitch. So we've done our first two, and I'm going to start on row 3, which is going to be a knit row, and then carry on to row 4, which will be a purl row, and so on till we get to 42 rows of stocking stitch. So when you finish the headpiece, you'll have something that looks a bit like this, minus this little water drop that I've got on mine. It looks quite long because it's going to fold in half along the head like that. So that's his front of his head, and this is going to be the back. So we need to work our way down the back of his body, copying exactly what we did on the other side. So we're now going to make the back of his top. So I'm going to rejoin on my purple yarn. And just knit the first row. And you remember from the other side that the top, like the trousers, was made in garter stitch, which is where we knit every row. So we're going to do that again. And the top is 24 rows long. So this is going to be my first row, and then I'm going to do another 23 rows of knit. So 23 rows in total, sorry, 24 rows in total of garter stitch. And as always, don't forget to fasten off your ends when you cut away the main colour. All of these loose ends, by the way, where I'm tying these into knots, don't worry about these, because when we sew up our bear, they're all going to be hidden on the inside, so you won't be able to see them. So now I'm going to do another 23 rows of garter stitch. And then again, following the pattern that we had on the other side, we need to change back into the trouser colour. So again, I'm just going to pick up my new colour and start to knit with it. And we're going to garter stitch 16 rows in the trouser colour until we get to his crotch area, where we're then going to break it off into his separate legs. So for this section now, it's just going to be 16 knit rows, which is 16 rows of garter stitch. What? And as always, just fasten off the ends. So once you've done those 16 rows, you're then up to what is the crotch area on the other side. So we need to break into 2 legs so that we can match it up when we fold it in half. So to do this, we have got 20 stitches on our row and we need to just work on 10 to make a leg. So we're just going to knit 10 stitches only. So just knit 10 stitches as usual. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So once we get to 10, we're just going to then turn our work as if we were at the end of the row. So just turn it round and then knit another row. And we're just going to repeat doing that. So we're just going to knit on these 10 stitches only, backwards and forwards, and leave the other 10 needles, these ones here, just leave them on the needle and don't do any work on those at all. So like the other leg, it's going to be 30 rows of garter stitch. So I've just done our first 2 and I'm going to continue with another 28 rows until we get down to where we're going to change back to the main colour for his foot. And at the end of your 30 rows, you'll have one much longer leg there, which is still on the same needle as the other leg that we haven't started yet. So now to match up with the other side, we are going to change back into his main colour for his foot. I apologise, by the way, for the change in lighting. It's got dark outside and I don't have any studio lights. So I'm going to pick up my other colour and just knit with that. Now remember, his feet, like his head, are knitted in stocking stitch rather than garter stitch. So we're going to knit this first row. And then we're going to purl the next row to make sure that all of our V's are on the same side and all of our bumps are on the same size to give us a smoother finish. And just secure the ends. I've already cut that away this time, but it doesn't matter either way. And then take that away. And then we're going to purl this next row. And we're going to do a total of 6 rows of stocking stitch. So this purl row is my second row, so I've got another 4 rows to go. And then we've now finished off that foot, so we need to cast off to get all of our stitches off the needle. So to do this, we're going to just knit our first 2 stitches as normal. So right behind the left, round the back, through and off, and then the second stitch. And then we're going to stop there and we're going to slide this first stitch over the second. So you're going to want to make sure that you're holding this tight, because if you don't, that will just slide off the needle as well. So I'm holding mine like this with it wrapped over my first finger and my fourth finger, but you can do it whatever way you like. And then I'm just going to use my left hand needle to hook that loop, that first loop, pull it up to the end, make sure you pull in this one tight and just slide that one over the next stitch. Then we're just going to knit one more stitch and then repeat that and pull the first stitch over the second, again pulling the second stitch nice and tight, and repeat that to the end of the row. And then when you get to the last stitch, just pull that into a big loop, snip away the end, and just pull that end through the loop and pull it tight, and that will give you your first complete leg. So once we've casted off, we've now got one leg and we need to make his other leg. Obviously there's no wool to pick up at the moment, so we need to rejoin on our trouser colour. We're just going to go into that first stitch as if we were going to knit as normal. And then imagine you're changing colour, so you're just picking it up. So we're just going to start to knit with it as if it was connected to the work. And just knit as normal. and then we're going to carry on knitting along the row. As you're rejoining this yarn on, you want to make sure that you keep an end that's fairly long. That's because if that's too short, it can unravel and then your whole leg will fall off. So just like the other leg, we're going to garter stitch 30 rows in the trouser colour. So this is my first row, and I'm going to knit another 29 rows to make 30 rows of garter stitch. And then at the end of the 30 rows, we need to change back into his foot colour. So same as with the other leg, we're going to pick up our main colour and start to knit with that, and that will be the first row of our 6 rows of stocking stitch for his foot. And then fasten off the end. And then purl the next row to carry on in stocking stitch. And as with every other foot we've done so far, we're going to do 6 rows of stocking stitch. And then again we've got to the end of his foot, so we're just going to cast off like we did the other side. So I'll show you how to do that again. So we're just going to knit the first 2 stitches as usual. And then pulling this strand of yarn nice and tight so it doesn't slide off, use your left hand needle to pull that first stitch over the second. And then knit 1 more stitch. And again, holding that tight, using your left hand needle, pull that first stitch over the second. And we're going to repeat that to the end of the row until we get to our last stitch. And once you get to the last stitch, we're going to pull that last loop wider to make a big gap. Snip that away from the ball of yarn, and then just pull that through the loop and pull it tight to secure it. Now what you're left with is a bear that looks something like this. So he's got 2 sides. So we've got his legs, his top and his head. This is going to be folded in half like this when we sew him up. So you can see we're starting to get our little bear shape coming together. Now his arms are going to come out from the side of his top here. So we're going to start at this end and work our way outwards. So you're going to need your top colour wool. So mine is purple. And we're going to cast on 16 stitches. So I'm going to use the long tail method again, but you don't have to. You can use whichever method you feel most comfortable with. I will show you how to go through the long tail method again though. So we're going to leave a nice long end and we're going to start to tie a knot. But then rather than pulling this all the way through this loop, we're just going to grab it and pull it through slightly. And then secure that to create your first loop. I'm then going to pop that onto my needle and pull the ends to secure it. Remember to keep it loose so it continues to slide up and down nice and easily. So with the long tail method, remember we need to put our fingers into a point like this and go in between the strands that are hanging down from our needle. So you're going to want the short end that's not connected to the ball of yarn, you want that over your thumb, and the long end that is connected to the ball over your finger. We're going to spread our fingers apart and grab them with our remaining fingers, so it looks like that. And then you're going to go under the bit that's under your thumb, over the bit that's over your finger, through that U, and then pull it tight. Under the bit under your thumb, over the bit over your finger, through the U, and pull it tight. Now we're going to cast on 16 stitches, so that's 3 so far. I'm going to carry on until I have 16 stitches on my needle. So I now have 16 stitches on my needle, and we're going to start by making his sleeve. So his sleeve, like his top, is going to be made in garter stitch. So we're going to knit every row, and it's going to be 20 rows long. So just going to knit my first row, and basically just knit 20 rows. And then after 20 rows we have his sleeve. So now we need to change back into the main colour to make his hands. So bring back in your main colour, and again we're going to change colour as we did when we were making the body. So start to knit, but pick up your main colour. And then just knit the first row. Now you may notice a bit of a theme where his actual body, so his head and feet, were both in stocking stitch, and we're going to carry this on for his hands. So his hands are going to be in stocking stitch, and they're also going to be 6 rows just like the feet. So I'm knitting my first row, and then I'm going to purl the next, and we're going to do 6 rows in total of stocking stitch. And again, because we changed colour, just going to break that off and secure the ends. And then I'm going to purl my next row, and I'm going to continue for 6 rows of stocking stitch. And then after 6 rows we've finished his hand, so we just need to cast off. So again, I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to knit the first 2 stitches, and keeping this tight, pull your first stitch over your second, knit 1 more, and again pull the first stitch over the second, and carry that on to the end of the row. And then once we get to the end, pull that last stitch nice and wide, snip it away from the ball of yarn, and pull the loose end through the loop, and then pull it tight. And that is his complete arm. So to show you where this is going to sit on the bear, once your bear's folded in half, he's got his arm, and his arm folds in half as well. So it's going to fold in half this way, and it's going to stick out just like that. So now we need to make another arm for his other side. It's going to be made in the exact same way we just made this one, which is going to be cast on 16 stitches, garter stitch 20 rows, change to the main colour, stocking stitch 6 rows, and then cast off. Before we sew up our bear, we're first going to give him his little face. I'm going to be using safety eyes. So these are safety eyes, and they're really good for toys because they look really cute once they're in, and because of this ridged backing and the back that you slide on, they won't come back out. You don't have to use these, and if you choose not to, then you can just use black thread instead. But I'm going to use safety eyes, so we're going to fold our bear in half along his head. Once he's folded in half, you can sort of figure out where you want his face. So I'm just going to position my eyes by poking the back through the head so that they stick out in the middle. If you're doing this with thread, you can just use some black thread, tie a knot in the end, and thread it through from the back to the front to stitch your eyes in place. But I'm just going to pop my eyes through, put one about there, and another about there. So I've popped his eyes in place like that, and once I'm happy with the position, I'm going to take the safety eye backings, which look like this, and I'm just going to pop the backs onto the back of the safety eyes. Now that those are in place, we're going to make the rest of his features. So grab your black yarn if you haven't already used it for the eyes, and just cut off a strand. And we're just going to tie a knot in the end. And then we're going to need to thread this yarn onto our darning needle. A top tip for doing this: take your yarn, rather than going straight through that hole, because that won't fit very easily, take your yarn and fold it over your needle like that, and then pinch it right close to the top. Then once you've pinched it, you can just slide that nice and easily through the hole in your darning needle. So I'm going to come through from the back, so inside, so I'm coming through from the centre, and mark out where you want to start his nose. So I'm going to start my nose just about here, And I'm just going to go back and forward through the stitches to make his nose. As you do this, make sure you don't pull the stitches too tight, because if you do, it looks like this. And you can see that's pulled those stitches that we've knit. So you want to keep it nice and loose so it doesn't affect the stitches that you've knit. And just go back and forward. Until you're happy with his nose shape. So I'm going to stop my nose shaping there. Now we need to do his little mouth. So I'll just finish off the nose and pull that through to the back. Then I want his mouth, the centre of his mouth, to come down to around about here. So I'm just going to pop my needle through. And then back up to the nose. And then just out slightly here to give him a little frowny face. And I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. And pull that through so we finish it off with the end of our yarn inside the head. So I'm going to flip the head over now. And just secure it in place. So to secure it in place, I'm just going to go through a bit of our black thread that we've done, the stitches we did with our black thread, and not pull it all the way through so we've got a bit of a loop, and then put that in through that loop and pull it tight, and that will leave it in a nice secure knot. Then we can just snip away any excess, and that's his face. Don't worry about these ends, because as with all these other ends from where we've changed colour, these won't be visible. So he has his little face now, and he's starting to look a bit like a bear. So all we need to do is just sew him up. The easiest way to do this is probably to do it inside out. So that's the way I'm going to show you. So we're just going to fold our bear in half, but the wrong way. And we're going to sew around all the edges of the bear, but we're going to leave a little opening between his legs. That's because we're going to need to turn him the right way out, and then we're going to need to get the stuffing in. Because we're starting at the trousers, I'm going to take my trouser colour yarn and snip a strand. And I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of that, and again just thread that onto our needle. I'm going to start from the centre side, so I'm going to start from just around his sort of knee level. So I'm just going to go through from one side to the other, and then down the leg. And I'm going to do this in back stitch because that makes it a bit more secure. So I'm going to go back on myself there, and then forward about 2 stitches, and then back 1 and forward 2. And then once we get to the end of the trousers, we're going to change into the main colour to sew up the edge of his feet. So I am going to tie that in a knot with one of these ends that we just have loose here from when we changed colour. I'm just going to tie that in a knot. And snip away the strand. And then take a strand of my main colour. And basically just do the same thing around his foot. These ends might get in the way a little bit, but you just have to manoeuvre around them. And if you want to just sew them in, you can do. And then come through from that side, go forward 2 stitches, and then back 1. And I'm literally just going to carry on doing this, so changing colour wherever the bear changes colour, and go all the way around his foot, up his trousers, up his top, and then all the way up to the crease where we've folded his head. Then going to repeat the process on the other side, starting from his knee and coming all the way up to the side of his head. When your bear's all sewn up, he's going to look something like this. So you've got all these loose ends. But don't worry, because we're now going to turn him inside out and you won't be able to see them. So you should have left a little opening between his two legs there. So we are literally just going to turn him inside out, including his little legs. And now this is what our little bear looks like. So now we just need to stuff him. I've got my stuffing and I'm just going to shove it up to the top of his head through the hole we left between his legs. Once we've stuffed his body, make sure we stuff his legs as well. So I'm going to just stuff that bit down to the foot. You're just going to need to shape the stuffing until he is the right shape. He's going to look a bit like a tube at this point because we haven't created a neck for him just yet, so don't worry if he looks a bit cylindrical. When you're happy with the shape of your bear, we then just need to finish sewing up the open bit between his legs. So take a strand of your trouser colour and just as before, tie a knot in the end. Pop that onto your darning needle. And we're going to start from one of his knees. So pop that through from the inside so that the knot is going to be hidden inside the bear. So for this method, I'm just going to find the last stitch that we haven't sewn up yet. So I'm just going to go up through that stitch. I'm going up from his foot up towards his crotch and through that stitch. And then pull that. And then on the opposite side, I'm going to do the same thing and go through that first stitch. And then as you pull that tight, it closes it up nice and neatly. Just realised his foot might be in the way. So I'm using the garter stitch bumps as a guide. So I'm going to go up through that bump. And then up through the next bump on the other side. You can pull it tight. And then again, up through that bump. And up through the bump on the other side. And I'm going to just repeat this all the way down to the other knee. And if you need to, as you go, you can just add a bit more stuffing to his legs. And then once I've got to the end, I'm just going to go through my last stitch and thread the end through that loop before it's pulled all the way through. Pull that tight, and that will secure that in place in a knot. Then poke that through the bear next to the stitch, pull it through, and then that will keep this end tucked into the bear so you can't see it. And then we just snip away the thread. And there we have our bear. Now he's looking a bit square, so we need to give him his neck. So to give him his neck, we're going to take a bit of yarn in the main colour and just cut a length of it like that. Don't tie a knot in the end this time. Just put it straight onto your darning needle. We're then going to start at the back of the bear and just put our needle into a stitch. You're going to go into a stitch like that and then out of a stitch like that. And we're just going to go under and over the stitches and start to pull that through. Now when you pull it through, make sure you leave an end here because we're going to use that to secure the neck at the back. And just carry that on all the way around the head until you end up back at the back where you started. Once we end up back at the back, we've got 2 loose ends now, and we're going to use these sort of like drawstrings just to pull it tight to create a neck. So I'll pull that in, and you can see as I pull, it draws in the neck. We're just going to tie these in a knot. Make sure you keep it pulled nice and tight as you do this. Pull that into a knot and make it a double knot as well, just to make sure that that neck is extra secure. We're then, like we just threaded in the ends of our trouser colour, we're just going to pop that end back onto the darning needle and thread it through the head, and then do the same with the other strand. And then cut away, the ends. There you go, he's starting to look a little bit more like a little bear. Now he just needs his ears. So again, I'm going to take a strand of my main colour wool, and I'm going to tie this in a knot at the end and pop that on my darning needle. And then starting at the back of his ear, I'm just going to go through his head from the back to the front. You will have an end here, but we're going to sew that in later, so don't worry. And you're just going to keep going backwards from the front to the back of the head and pulling it tight, and that will make the little dents for the ears. I'm just doing this in a running stitch, but you can do it in back stitch if you prefer. And there's his first little ear. To do the second ear, rather than break off this strand of yarn, I'm just going to poke it through the head and out to where his other ear will start. I'm not going to pull that too tight because that might misshape the ear, so just a nice loose stitch through. And then again, I'm just going to do a running stitch down the other side to make his other ear. You're going to make sure that you finish on the back. Then again, what I'm going to do is just go through a stitch, but don't pull that all the way through, and then thread this end through that loop. Then once you pull that tight, it'll be nice and secure, and you can thread the loose end through the head and snip off the end. With the other end, this is a bit short for me to hook on now, so I'm just going to start feeding it through and then hook it onto the darning needle. And again, just thread that through the head and snip off anything that's sticking out. The thing with a lot of knitted toys is a lot of the success of your project might be down to how you shape the stuffing. So his head's looking a bit long here, so I'm just going to puff his head down a little bit to make it a bit more round. And I'm going to give him a little squeeze to make sure all of the stuffing's nice and neatly arranged. And then we have his body. Now we need to sew up his arms. With the arms, I'm going to sew these up the same way I sewed up the bear. So we're going to fold them in half with the right side facing inwards. So where your stocking stitch, you've got your V side, that's going to be inside as we sew it up. And then when we're finished sewing it up, we'll turn it the right way out. So I'm going to cut a strand of my main colour wool as I'm starting with his hand. Tie a knot in the end and pop that onto my darning needle. So fold your arm in half, and we're going to start at the side where the crease is. So I'm just going to go through, and again I'm going to do this in a back stitch just like I did the body. So forward 2 stitches and then back 1. Okay, so we're down to the top colour now, so I'm just going to tie this in a knot with this loose loose end I have here. I'm going to leave that on there because it's going to be hidden away inside. Then we're going to break off a strand in the top colour. And again tie a knot. And then carry on with the back stitch down the arm. With the arm, we're only going to sew down to the corner. We're going to leave a little opening here. That's where we're going to turn it inside out and we're going to stuff it and then sew to the body. Now I'm not going to break this yarn off because I'm going to use that to sew it to the body. So we're just going to turn his arm the right way out through the little hole that we've left at the bottom. And with just this strand that's still on my darning needle sticking out, I'm going to pop the rest of the loose ends into the arm, along with some stuffing. When you're stuffing your toys, make sure you don't overstuff them, because if you overstuff them, then you'll be able to see the stuffing through your work, because the stitches will be stretched. So make sure you don't put too much in. So his arm needs to be attached to his body. So if you'd like to pin it in place, you can do now, but I'm just going to go straight in and start sewing it on. So I'm just going to hold it in place with my left hand. And you want the seam from his arm to line up with the seam on the side of his body. I'm just going to go through a stitch on his body and then through a stitch on the top. And then again through a stitch on the body. And then from sleeve and back to the body. And just work this all the way around until your arm is fully attached. And then to break off the end, I'm going to do the same thing as always, through a stitch, pull the end through the loop, pull tight, thread through the body, and break off the end. I'm going to sew up the other arm in exactly the same way, and then sew it onto the other side of his body, and we'll have our finished little bear. With both his arms on, he should look something like this. So the last thing just to finish him off is a little scarf. You don't have to make a scarf, but it will help keep him nice and cozy. I'm going to make my scarf in this really bright yellow, because why not? So we're going to cast on 60 stitches for his scarf, because it's going to come 60 stitches, so it's going to start here, go round his neck, and then back down the front again. So if you're doing the long tail method, make sure you leave this end really long this time, because you're going to need to be able to pick up 60 stitches from it. If you're using the knitwise method, then don't worry about that. I'm going to use the long tail method. So again, start as if we were going to tie a knot, but just pull that part the way through and pull it to secure into a loop. And pop that onto the needle and pull both ends. So I'm going to pick up 60 stitches from this. So I've got my end that's not connected to the ball of yarn over my thumb, connected to the yarn over the finger, thread and grab, and then go under the bit under my thumb, over the bit over my finger, through the U, and then pull it tight. And I'm just going to keep going doing that until I have 60 stitches on the needle. Once we've got our 60 stitches, we're going to do 4 rows of moss stitch. So moss stitch is the one where you knit one stitch, then purl the next, knit, purl, all the way along the row. And it's going to give you a bump effect with a V facing you, then a bump, then a V, then a bump. Then on the following row, rather than carrying the V's up one column and then the bumps up one column, which is rib, we're going to alternate. So it gives you a really bumpy effect. So we're going to knit the first stitch, as usual, with our right hand needle behind the left. Slide that through and slide it off. Then because we're going to purl the next stitch, we need to bring our yarn from behind our right hand needle to in front of it. So we're going to take that around the right hand needle only before we've done a stitch and in between the two needles, and then we're at the front ready to go. So then I'm going to purl the next stitch, so our right hand needle's in front of our left hand needle, go between the two, round the back of the right hand needle only, bring that through and slide it off. Then for the knit stitch we need to take this back to the back again. So again between the two needles and behind the right hand needle, and then knit. And then keep doing that and change the wool position as you go along the whole row. And at the end of that row, if I show you up close, you should be able to see we've got a bump and then a V and then a bump and a V all the way along that row, and it's the same on the other side. So for the next row of moss stitch, we have a V facing us and a bump on the second stitch. So we're not going to carry the V's up. As I said, we're going to put a bump here instead, so we need to start with a purl stitch. So I'm going to start with my yarn at the front and purl the first stitch, and then take the yarn back to the back and knit the second, and then purl the third and knit the fourth, and carry that on for the rest of the row. After this row we're going to do another 2 rows, so we've done 4 rows in moss stitch. So after your 4 rows you have a scarf that looks something like this. You can see it's got that bumpy effect between the purl and the knit stitches. We then just need to cast off. So we're going to knit 2 stitches, and then keeping this tight, pull the first stitch over the second. But you'll have mastered this already from when you made the bear. So just cast off all the stitches on this row. And then on the last stitch, pull that loose, snip off the end and put it through that loop. Then all that's left to do is sew in the ends of his scarf. So just pop a loose end on your darning needle, and I'm just going to thread it through a couple of stitches along that cast on edge, or cast off edge, which either side you're doing. And pull that through. And then just snip that away close to where you cast off. And then with the other end, just go through the stitches on the end. Pull that through and snip it off. And then the final step is just pop your little scarf onto your bear. If you want to sew that in place you can do, or you can leave it loose in case it gets a little bit toasty.